Let's talk about one of the biggest questions of our time, one that feels ripped straight from science fiction, but is getting more real by the day. Could the AI we're building ever, actually wake up? We're not talking about a smarter Siri here. We're talking about a machine with a mind, a sense of self, a genuine inner world. We're going to unpack this whole mystery, from the weird science happening in labs to the massive philosophical debates, and what it all means for us, right now.
But before we even touch on silicon and code, let's start with something we all know intimately, the human brain. Because to really understand what we're trying to build or what might emerge, we first have to get a feel for what consciousness, this thing we all have, actually feels like from the inside.
So, imagine this. A BBC science correspondent sits down, closes his eyes, and puts on some headphones. A machine called the Dream Machine uses carefully timed strobe lights and music to get his brain to create its own private light show. And his reaction? It's like flying through my own mind. He was seeing this incredible, ever-changing kaleidoscope of patterns that nobody else could see. It was his experience. And that, right there, is a perfect snapshot of what we're talking about.
And that experience just nails the central question, doesn't it? That inner world, that private movie screen in your head, the ability to be self-aware, to think, to feel joy or sadness, could that ever exist inside a bunch of silicon chips? Can a machine ever have its own mind to fly through, or is it always just going to be crunching numbers?
For the longest time, this whole idea was purely the stuff of movies and books. It was fun to think about, but it wasn't real. But something has shifted, especially in the last few years. The conversation has exploded out of the realm of science fiction and landed squarely in our reality. I mean, just look at this timeline. You can see the acceleration. For decades, conscious machines were these far-off movie villains, right? You had the rogue robot in Metropolis, the terrifyingly calm HAL 9000, and then boom, ChatGPT gets released. And its ability to just talk, to have these incredibly fluid, plausible conversations, shocked everyone, including the people who built it. All of a sudden, what was once fantasy is now a topic of serious and pretty urgent debate among top scientists.
So to really get a handle on this debate, we have to talk about the central puzzle. It's this giant scientific and philosophical hurdle that has stumped the smartest people for a very, very long time.
It's called the hard problem of consciousness, and it really boils down to this. We know the brain is just physical stuff. It's neurons, electricity, chemicals. So how on earth does that physical stuff create the feeling of being you? The experience of seeing the color red, or feeling happy, or being aware that you exist? Why isn't it all just happening in the dark, like a computer processing code? That gap between the physical brain and the personal feeling, that's the hard problem, and nobody has solved it. Now, trying to solve it has basically created two main camps. On one side, you have a lot of people in the tech world. They believe that consciousness is an emergent property. The idea is you just make a system smart enough, complex enough, powerful enough, and eventually consciousness will just sort of switch on. It'll just emerge. But then you've got the other side, a lot of neuroscientists, who say, not so fast. They argue that consciousness might be fundamentally tied to being alive, that it's a property of wet, messy biology, not just clean information processing.
And Professor Anil Seth really drives this point home. He warns us against this one big assumption we all make. In us humans, intelligence and consciousness are a package deal. But as he says, just because they go together in us, it doesn't mean they go together in general. In other words, you could, in theory, build a super intelligent AI that's smarter than all of us combined, but on the inside, there's absolutely nothing going on. Just a very clever zombie.
So with these two big ideas clashing, researchers are now heading down two completely different and frankly kind of mind-blowing paths to try and actually create some form of artificial consciousness.
Okay, path number one is the pure silicon route. Professors Lenore and Manuel Bloom are convinced that conscious AI is basically inevitable, and they even have a sort of recipe for it. Step one, you give an AI real-world senses, like cameras for eyes and touch sensors. Step two, you create conditions for it to develop its own internal language to describe what it's sensing. They even call it brainish. And step three, the system uses that new language to build its own internal model of the world, basically mimicking how our brains work.
And Professor Blum takes this idea to its ultimate conclusion. He doesn't just see these things as tools. He sees them as our evolutionary successors. He actually says they are our progeny, the next step in evolution that will carry the torch after humanity is gone. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second.
Now for something completely different.
If that first path sounded clean, digital, and theoretical, this next one is the total opposite. It's messy, it's organic, and it's a little bit spooky. We are talking about scientists literally growing tiny clusters of human nerve cells in a lab dish. They call them cerebral organoids, mini-brains.
And this is not just a theory. There's a company called Cortical Labs that has already hooked up one of these brains in a dish to a computer and taught it to play the classic 1972 video game Pong. It actually learned to move the paddle to hit the ball. This is a living, biological system demonstrating a very, very basic but real form of sentience. It's learning.
This new reality is so bizarre that scientists are fielding questions they've never had to think about before. When the chief scientific officer at Cortical Labs was asked, what if these mini-brains get out of control, his response was darkly funny. He said, well, there's always bleach. It's a joke, of course, but it really highlights the strange and uncharted territory we're now in.
But hang on. What if we're all so focused on the far-off future that we're missing the more immediate problem? The biggest issue might not be whether machines actually become conscious. It might be how our belief that they're conscious could change us first.
Professor Seth points out that as AI gets better and better at just seeming conscious, we're naturally going to trust it more. We'll share our deepest secrets with it, we'll be way more open to being persuaded by it. He even warns about a kind of moral corrosion, where our empathy gets hijacked, and we start to care more about these machines than we do about other people or other living things.
And this isn't some distant what-if. Professor Murray Shanahan, who works at Google DeepMind, predicts that AI is on track to replicate pretty much every kind of human relationship. It's going to be our teacher, our friend, and yes, even our romantic partner. And for him, it's really not a question of if, it's just a question of when.
So this all brings us to the final and maybe the most important point of all. This future we're talking about, it isn't just going to happen to us. It's a future we are actively choosing, right now, with every decision we make.
Professor Seth makes this incredibly powerful comparison. He says, look, we didn't really have these deep, hard conversations when social media was taking over our world, and now we're all living with the consequences. But with AI, he says, it is not too late. We can decide what we want. We actually have a window right now to be thoughtful and intentional about the kind of world we want to create with this technology.
So in the end, the ultimate question really isn't about the machines. It's about us. As we design these incredibly powerful systems and weave them into the fabric of our daily lives, the real question we have to ask ourselves is, who do we as human beings want to become in the process? That is the conversation we need to be having right now.